So you'd think on a 4-game winning streak, the Phillies would make up a lot of ground. Well, not really. The Braves, they're on a 5-game winning streak. The Mets have won back-to-back games, so right now the Phillies sit 11 games back of the Mets in the division. After that incredible comeback win, we got to talk more about what's going on with this team. Is this the start of something special? Joining us is Paul Boye from a great podcast called Phillies Therapy. What's up, Paul?
Pat, how you doing, man? You are absolutely right on. You could not have asked for a better series this weekend.
I mean, what a weekend. Phil's fire Joe Girardi. They sweep the struggling Angels. But let's go a little bit deeper on the Girardi move first. For you, was it the correct move? And if so, why do you think it had to be made right now?
Well, it was really only a matter of time. I think we could all start to see the writing on the wall come into clearer focus as the season went on, and the Phillies just couldn't really build any kind of positive momentum. You can notice it mostly after they played really well against the Rockies, played really well against the Dodgers, and they didn't follow that up with strings of series wins. They just kind of looked flat. They started to look almost like they weren't enjoying being out there, which I think was the biggest indictment of this whole thing. We could all kind of sense that Girardi, this was going to be his last year. But as the losses piled up and the Phillies stayed double digits behind the Mets, and they just continued to look kind of lifeless and joyless at times, it became harder not to say something needs to be done. And they have a lot of problems still, but Girardi was one of them. And even though 3 or 4 games isn't really a whole lot to judge a change of tone, they're off to a good start.
All right, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask you to do some quick math, sort of, okay?
Okay.
So, all right, if you were drawing a pie chart, let's start with a pie chart. That's just kind of it's a terrible circle. But if you were drawing a pie chart, how do you assign blame when it comes to why the Phillies are where they are after basically more than a decade of futility? So we'll fill this in.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think if you're looking at this year, Girardi probably represented no more than about 25% of what was wrong. I mean, that's a pretty big chunk, but no more than that.
Okay.
I think a lot of it came down to, with Girardi, his bullpen management and not really putting guys, especially in the lineup, in a position to succeed. He had sort of developed a pattern here of preferring some of the veterans that were brought in from camp over some of the younger guys. And now, of course, we see this weekend, you play some of the younger guys, they get a spark. Bryson Stott hits the walk-off home run. It's almost like they were being proven right there. Beyond that, I think the roster that was put behind him does shoulder some of the blame here. They're obviously imperfect, but they're not playing up to standard. And I think the manager has to wear some of that. If you have talented hitters, talented pitchers assembled on a roster, it's the manager's job to make it work.
Sure.
I think we've said about, a few weeks ago, this team has talent. It's undeniable. They should be playing better than they are. So the roster takes probably about another fifth of it. Beyond that, I think a lot of the blame really falls on some of the mid-2010s teams and the draft failures, really, that have led to this point of needing to spend so much money to supplement this roster with so many free agents from elsewhere. It might take up the rest of the pie chart, if I'm being totally honest with you, because it's not just about this year.
Sure.
It's about everything that's led to this year. This is the result of a series of falling dominoes that have led to things being pretty precarious for most of the year, most of the previous few years.
Paul, you made me have to do quick math on my feet. I think I added everything correctly. So we're looking at Joe G, 25% roster, 20%. Previous years, 55. Is that correct? 55%? Did I add that up correctly? 55, 25, 20. Does that look right? I think that's right.
Yeah. I think that's about right. It looks a little imbalanced, but you really do have to think about everything that brought them to this point. It's not just this year.
Our art department is off this weekend. That is a poor representation. Anyway, moving forward then, what should the goal be for Dave Dombrowski from this point forward?
That's a great question. And I think really what the team needs to do is try to get back into contention this year over the next 6 weeks leading up to the trade deadline. I would argue that they might need to make a move now or soon, but that's not something you typically see this early in the season, this early in June. I know a couple of years ago, the Phillies traded for Jay Bruce early in June, and that ended up being fortuitous as Andrew McCutchen went down shortly thereafter. But you don't typically see that. And I think things are complicated now that there are extra playoff spots. You have more teams who could possibly be in it and don't necessarily want to sell pieces so early. So I think they have a lot of work to do over the next 6 weeks. And then what they need to do near the deadline is, regardless of where they stand, I think they need to look toward adding a multi-year player. And what I mean by that is not a rental, not somebody whose contract is up at the end of this year or who has a player option for next year where the Phillies' hands are kind of tied and they don't know if they're going to have that player. I think it's going to be imperative to build around this core on the fly and not just leave all of the work to the winter. Because as we've seen, there are warts here. They still need to improve the defense as much as they can. They still need to improve the bullpen. And you hope Ranger Suarez in the back end of the rotation pick it up a little bit more so you feel a little bit better about that part of your roster. But there's too much work to leave for one offseason. And if they can find their way back into contention, keep this momentum that they found this weekend going a little bit, they'll be in a good position to add. I think they'll want to look toward center field in particular, and definitely the back end of the bullpen. It would really help if they had players who are under control for at least next year too, so that they could form more of a cohesive core and be a little less about the mercenaries.
So let's talk about today. It's better to be happy than miserable. Incredible comeback win. I think it had the feeling of like an 08, 09, 2010 kind of win, did it not?
This was, when I tell you that this was a movie script of a series, and especially today, that's what today was. This is exactly what this team needed to try and get people back into it and interested. Interest had been waning for a couple of weeks, maybe a month plus now, when the team had just looked like they were not into it. They kept falling back in the standings. Now, Girardi is gone. Rob Thompson is in. Young guys are playing a little bit more in these first couple of games. Then you hold Mike Trout 0 for an entire series. Shohei Ohtani barely does any damage. And then you have Sunday's game where they mount an incredible comeback where the franchise player hits a 2-out grand slam to tie the game in the 8th inning. They almost let the game get away. And then Bryson Stott, their top guy, their top prospect, on whom so much rides for the future of shortstop right now, hits a walk-off home run. It's amazing. It's incredible. I don't think you could really ask for much more in the way of trying to get people back in, to try and get them to buy into what this team could do when they hit on all cylinders. This was just the perfect example of it, not just today, but this entire weekend series.
All right, let's say the Phillies make a run at the playoffs. What has to go absolutely right for that to be the case?
The bullpen. The bullpen has to be great. They have to be better than what they've been. Maybe somehow, some way, Caleb Cotham is able to unlock something in somebody. I know for a while there they had Andrew Bellotti looking like he was a little bit better. He had a shaky week or so recently. But the starters are pretty good. And for a playoff team, if you have a top three of Wheeler, Nola, and Gibson, you're doing pretty well. And that's to say nothing about Zach Eflin, hopefully a return to form Ranger Suarez. You expect, again, they haven't really performed like this, but you expect that lineup should hit, even against some of the better pitchers. What's going to matter is in the middle innings and later in games when the leashes are shorter for the starting pitchers, when they get into a jam before the game gets away from them. Those relievers have to come in and hold things down. If they don't do that, they're going to have a hard time really hitting their way back into every game they fall behind in. They can do it. They have the talent. I think I see what Dombrowski sees in the collection of arms he's building for that back end of the bullpen, even though confidence is a little wavered right now. There is some talent there, and I think they can do it, and they will need to if this team wants to compete into the postseason.
Paul Boye, very exciting times, we hope, with the Phillies. You can check him out on the Phillies Therapy podcast. Paul, thanks so much, buddy.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Pat.
All right, coming up next in the zone with OTAs, we got our first look at newest Eagles addition, A.J. Brown. Will he take Jalen Hurts' game to the next level? Brandon Gouton joins us to talk Birds when the zone continues.